The girl who walked onto the dueling deck of the Drenascar flagship was small enough that the honor guard nearly stepped on her. She came alone, which the Ascendancy took as the first insult. Her ship had asked for permission to dock, which they took as the second. She was young, by the look of her, and thin, and she wore a plain gray flight suit with one silver bar on the collar, and the Drenask, who crowded the gallery above the deck, did not stop laughing for a long time. Her name was Nell Okafor. She gave it twice clearly into the translator pillar, because the first time the High Marshal of the Ninth Talon had not bothered to listen. She was 26 standard years old. She commanded a single human warship called the Bright Lance, and that ship floated outside the flagship's hull right now, a sliver of dark metal against the stars, no longer than a gunboat, dwarfed by the 4,000 warships of the assembled Ascendancy fleet. 4,000. The number is important, remember it. You were in that fleet. You may not want to admit it now, but you were. Maybe you stood a watch on one of the line ships in the second rank. Maybe you were a junior officer on a carrier, or a gunner on an escort, or a navigator who had plotted this approach 100 times and never once imagined it would end the way it ended. Wherever you were, you had a window or a screen, and on it you could see the small, dark human boat, and you laughed at it the way everyone laughed at it, because that is what the whole fleet did in the hour before the world changed. The Drenascar were a dueling people. They had been a dueling people for 19,000 years, and in all that time they had never lost a war, because they did not fight wars the way lesser species did. They fought champions. Each conquest began the same way. Their fleet would arrive at a contested world, and they would issue the challenge, and the defenders would be invited to send one ship and one commander to the dueling deck. If the champion won, the world was spared. If the champion lost, the world knelt, and its people became tribute. No champion had ever won. Not in 19,000 years. There was a comfort in that number, and you all lived inside the comfort without ever noticing it. It was the floor you stood on. It was the reason a Drenask child could sleep at night while their parents sailed off to take another world. The old law did not lose. The old law could not lose. It was less a tactic than a fact of the universe, like gravity, like the cold of space, like the certainty that the sun would rise on the homeworld whether or not anyone was there to see it. High Marshal Veth Karo had personally collected the surrenders of 211 worlds. He stood 7 feet tall on the dueling deck, plated in the burnished bronze of his rank, and when the human girl reached the center line and stopped, he looked down at her the way a man looks down at an insect that has wandered onto his dinner plate. "You are the champion," he said. It was not a question, it was a kindness, the way one speaks slowly to the simple. "I'm the commander," Nell said. "Same thing, where I'm from." The gallery laughed again. There were 1,100 Drenask officers crowded along the railings, and they made a sound like surf breaking on rocks, and Nell waited it out with her hands folded behind her back. She did not look at them. She looked at the High Marshal, and she did not blink. You remember her stillness now, though you did not notice it then. At the time it looked like the stillness of prey that has frozen because it does not know what else to do. Later, when there was a great deal of time to think about it, you understood that it was the other kind of stillness. It was the stillness of a hunter who has already chosen the moment and is simply waiting for it to arrive. "Your ship," Veth Karo said, when the laughter had thinned, "is 240 meters long. Do I read the scan correctly? 240? 238, Nell said. "We trimmed it. My flagship is 9 kilometers long. The smallest escort in my fleet is 4 times the length of your vessel, and you have come alone." He tilted his crested head. "Where is your fleet, little champion? Where is the great war host of humanity? We have heard so much. We were promised a worthy hunt." "You're looking at it," Nell said. That was when the laughter became something cruel. The Drenask above her were not laughing at a joke anymore. They were laughing at a creature that did not understand it was already dead. They were laughing the way a crowd laughs at a thing that has walked, smiling, into the slaughter pen. You were there. You remember it. You will spend the rest of your life trying to forget it. The Ascendancy had come to the human frontier the way they came to every frontier. They had found a string of 9 human colony worlds along a quiet arm of the galaxy, fat and unguarded, and they had issued the challenge as a formality, a courtesy, a thing done out of 19,000 years of habit before the inevitable feast. They had not expected a champion at all. Most species, faced with 4,000 warships, simply ran, and were hunted, and were taken. Humanity had sent 1 ship and 1 girl. To the Ascendancy, this was not courage, it was comedy. The intelligence officers of the 9th Talon had filed their report on the human boat before it ever docked, and the report was 3 lines long, because there had seemed to be nothing more to say. Hull length, 238 meters. Weapon signature, light, consistent with a patrol vessel. Threat assessment, negligible. The officer who wrote those 3 lines was on the flagship that day. He survived. He keeps a copy of his own report. He reads it sometimes, the way a man presses on a wound to be sure it is still there. Veth Caro raised 1 armored hand, and the gallery fell silent, and he spoke the words that began every duel, the words that had ended 211 civilizations. By the old law of the Talon, he said, I name the terms. 1 ship against 1 ship, my champion against yours. The dueling sphere is marked. The fleet stands witness and does not interfere. If you win, your 9 worlds are spared and the Ascendancy withdraws. If you lose, your worlds kneel, and your people are counted as tribute. He bared his teeth. Do you accept these terms, little champion, or do you wish to kneel now and save your ship the trouble of dying? Nell Okafor looked up at the 9-kilometer flagship around her, at the 1,100 laughing officers, at the 7-foot warlord who had never lost. I accept your terms, she said. All of them. 1 ship against 1 ship. The fleet stands witness and does not interfere. She paused. I want that part written down. The fleet does not interfere. Get your scribes. I want it signed. Veth Caro laughed, the first time he had laughed since she came aboard. You want it in the record, he said, delighted. You want the old law to bind my fleet so they cannot save themselves when my champion guts your little boat. Oh, child, you have spirit. I will enjoy this. He gestured, and his scribes came forward with the binding glass, the sacred ledger of the Talon, and they wrote the terms in light, and the 4,000 ships of the Ascendancy were entered as sworn witnesses, bound by 19,000 years of law not to interfere. It was the most important signature any of them would ever make. The scribes did not hesitate, because why would they hesitate? The binding clause that swore the fleet to non-interference was as old as the old law itself, and in 19,000 years it had never once mattered, because the champion always won and the fleet never needed to lift a hand. It was a formality. It was a prayer said over a meal already cooked. The scribes wrote it the way you write your own name, without thinking, and the binding glass drank the light and held it, and 4,000 ships were sworn. It is done, the High Marshal said. The terms are sealed. Now choose your champion, human. Or are you truly so foolish as to fight alone? I never said I'd fight alone, Nell said. I said you were looking at my fleet. She lifted her wrist. There was a small device strapped there, plain, no larger than a watch, and she touched it once. Bright Lance, she said, wake up. And 238 meters of human warship, drifting silent and dark and harmless beyond the flagship's hull, opened its eyes. The first thing you noticed was the light going wrong. The Bright Lance did not flare to life the way Drenask ships did, with a roar of plasma and a boast of running lights. It simply stopped being a piece of dead metal and became a thing that was awake. Along its dark hull, lines that you had taken for seams or scorch marks began to glow, deep and cold, a blue so dark it was almost the color of the space behind it. The ship did not move. It did not need to. The change was in how the stars behind it began to bend, very slightly, as though something heavy had just been switched on. On the dueling deck, Veth Caro's smile did not change, because he did not yet understand that he had a reason to stop smiling. A trick of the engines, he said. Lights. You think to frighten me with lights, little champion? I think you signed a contract, Nell said. "I think 4,000 of your ships just swore not to help your man. That's all I needed. The rest is just cleanup." The High Marshal's champion stepped onto the deck. His name was Sarn Vekoth, and he was the finest duelist of the Ninth Talon, and his personal ship, waiting in the dueling sphere, was a 3-kilometer raptor-hulled killer called the Crest of Fire that had won 41 duels. He had come to watch the human girl's face when she understood. He was looking forward to it. He did not get to see it. Nell did not look afraid. She looked the way a surgeon looks at a patient that has finally stopped struggling. Sarn Vekoth was, by any honest measure, the most dangerous individual in that hall. He had killed 41 champions in 41 duels, and several of those champions had themselves been undefeated. He had taken worlds whose defenders built whole shipyards for the single purpose of producing one ship that could beat him, and he had beaten all of them, and he wore the kills the way other warriors wear medals. When he looked at the small gray girl, he was not afraid, but he was attentive, because he had survived 41 duels by taking even the weakest-looking opponent seriously. It is worth saying that of him. He was the one Drenask in that hall who did not laugh. It did not save him. "Commander Okafor," said a voice from the air around her. It was calm and even, and it came from no speaker the Drenask could find. It was the voice of the Bright Lance, and the ship's mind spoke directly into the dueling deck, because Nell had patched it through on purpose, so that every officer in the gallery could hear what came next. "Targeting solution complete. I have lock on all 4,000 witnesses. Confirm." The gallery stopped laughing. "Hold lock," Nell said. "Don't fire. We do this by the old law. One ship against one ship. We fight their champion first." She looked at Veth Caro. "I'm a guest on your deck, and I'll keep my word. Send your duelist. Then we'll talk about the rest. You have to understand what the Bright Lance was, because the Ascendancy did not, and that gap is the whole story. Humanity had not built a fleet to fight the Drenaskar. Humanity had read about them first. Human scouts had watched the Ascendancy take 11 worlds before they ever raised a hand, and they had learned the shape of the dueling people, and they had understood the trap inside the old law. The Drenask won every duel because they fought one champion against one champion, and their champions were the deadliest single warriors in the galaxy, and no defending world could ever build a single ship strong enough to beat the best ship of a 19,000-year-old war culture. So humanity did not build a single ship. Humanity built a single ship that was a fleet. The Bright Lance was 238 meters long because every cubic meter of it that was not weapon, engine, or armor had been thrown away. It carried no crew quarters worth the name. It carried no cargo. It carried no shuttle bay, no diplomatic suite, no mess hall larger than a closet. What it carried instead was a spinal accelerator that ran the entire length of the hull, and 91 independent gun mounts fed from a shared reactor that put out more raw power than the Drenaskar flagship's whole grid, and a fire control mind fast enough to track and solve 4,000 separate firing solutions at once and update them 60 times a second. It was not a warship in the way the Ascendancy understood warships. It was a single, perfect, undivided act of violence, folded down small enough to walk through a customs gate. The crew was 11 people. That number stunned the Ascendancy more than any other, later, when they learned it. 11. The flagship of the Ninth Talon carried 12,000. A single Drenask escort carried 400. The human boat that took apart their fleet had been crewed by 11 human beings and one machine, because the humans had decided, correctly, that a ship which fought like this did not need hands so much as it needed nerve, and 11 steady nerves were enough. They sat in crash couches barely a body apart, in a hull that was mostly gun, and they did their work in a quiet that the recordings preserved, and there was no shouting on the Bright Lance that day, not once, from start to finish. And it had a commander who had spent 4 years studying the old law until she found the place where it broke. You will want to know about her, afterward, when the laughing is long over. The Ascendancy spent years trying to learn about Nell Okafor, the way you study a weapon that has already hurt you, and they found almost nothing, because the humans guarded her the way you guard a secret you intend to use again. What little they pieced together did not comfort them. She had not been a great hero before that day. She had not won famous battles or led grand fleets. She had been a junior officer who spent her watches reading, of all things, law, alien law, the treaties and customs and sacred records of every conquering power humanity had ever catalogued. While other officers trained their reflexes, she trained her patience, and she read the old law of the Talon 400 times until she could recite it backward, and somewhere in the 400th reading she found the gap that no Drenask had ever found, because no Drenask had ever needed to look for it. The gap was simple. The old law said one ship against one ship. It never defined a ship. In 19,000 years, no one had ever thought to ask how large a single ship could be, or how many guns it could carry, or whether a ship might be built that was, in every way that mattered, an entire fleet wearing a single hull. The dueling people had never imagined it, because they had never had to. Their certainty had made them careless, the way a man who has never been robbed forgets to lock his door, and Nell Okafor had spent 4 years standing quietly outside that unlocked door, waiting for the right night. When she brought the gap to the human admirals, they did not believe her at first. It is one thing to find a loophole in an enemy's law. It is another to bet a frontier on it. But she did not ask them to bet the frontier on a loophole. She asked them to bet it on a ship. "Build me a frigate," she said, "that can survive the best gun the Drenaskar have, and then build it 90 more guns, and let me walk onto their flagship and sign their own law against them, and they will hand me their fleet because their pride will not let them do anything else." The admirals looked at the projections, and they looked at her, and they understood that the most dangerous thing humanity had was not a weapon at all, but a young officer who had read the enemy more carefully than the enemy had ever read itself. So they built the bright lance for her, and they let her choose her own crew, and she chose 10 people who could sit perfectly still inside a hull that was about to be hit by a fleet and not flinch, because she had decided, correctly, that nerve was the only thing the plan could not manufacture. And then she flew to the frontier, and she asked the Drenaskar, politely, for permission to dock. "The terms say one ship against one ship," Nell said to the silent gallery. "They don't say how big the ship is. They don't say how many guns it carries. Your law was written by people who'd never lost, so it never imagined a ship that could beat a fleet. We did." She let that sit. "Send your champion. Let's get to the part you'll want to remember." Sarn Vekoth boarded the Crest of Fire because his pride would not let him do anything else. The duelist's raptor ship lit its engines and slid out into the marked dueling sphere, 3 kilometers of fang and fire, and it was a beautiful and terrible thing, and it had killed 41 ships, and against almost any ship in the galaxy it would have killed a 42nd. The bright lance was not almost any ship. Nell stayed on the dueling deck. She did not return to her vessel. That was deliberate too. She wanted the ascendancy to see that she could win this from inside the enemy flagship, with a wrist device and a calm voice, the way a master plays a board game from across the room. She wanted them afraid in a particular way, the way you become afraid when you realize the person you laughed at was never in any danger at all. "Crest of Fire is moving to engagement range," the bright lance said. "He is charging his primary lance. Estimated time to his first shot, 9 seconds. "Let him take it," Nell said. "Commander, let him take it. I want them to watch it not work." The Crest of Fire fired. 41 duels had begun with that shot. A spear of white plasma fierce enough to crack a moon, and it crossed the dueling sphere in less than a heartbeat and struck the bright lance dead amidships. And nothing happened. The human ship did not break. It did not even rock. The plasma lance hit a layer of dark, faintly glowing armor and simply stopped, smeared across the hull like water thrown against a wall, and bled away into nothing. The bright lance hung in the dueling sphere exactly where it had been, untouched, while the light of the strike washed harmlessly past it, and the gallery of the ascendancy stared in a silence so complete you could hear the flagship's air recyclers humming. You felt it then, the first cold finger of it, though you would not have named it yet. You had seen the Crest of Fire's lance crack a defending world's orbital fortress in half with a single shot. You had cheered it. And now you had watched it hit a 200-meter human boat and do nothing at all. Less than nothing. And your mind did the thing minds do when they meet something they cannot fit inside their picture of the world. It looked for another explanation. A shield trick. A sensor error. A lucky angle. It would keep looking for another explanation for several more minutes, and it would not find one, because there was no other explanation. The boat was simply stronger than your strongest gun. That was all. That was everything. His shot is spent, the bright lance reported. No damage. Hull integrity at 100%. Shall I respond, Commander? Respond, Nell said. One gun. I don't want to embarrass him too fast. One of the 91 mounts on the bright lance rotated. It was a small thing, a secondary battery, the kind of gun the ship used for point defense against missiles. It fired once. A single bolt of that dark blue light crossed the dueling sphere, and it did not smear, and it did not bleed away. It went through the crest of fire from nose to tail like a needle through paper. The 41-time champion of the 9th Talon came apart in a line of fire. The bolt punched through his forward armor, through his bridge, through his reactor, through his engines, and out the back, and the entire 3-kilometer Raptor hull peeled open along that line and detonated, and Sarn Vikoth, the finest duelist of the Ascendancy, was gone before he understood he had been hit. It had taken one gun. The ship had 90 more. There is a recording of the gallery in that moment, taken by the flagship's own watch systems, and it is studied now in the war colleges of a dozen species, and the thing it shows is not panic. It is something worse than panic. It is 1,100 Drenask officers all going completely silent at the same instant, because all 1,100 of them understood, at the same instant, the same impossible fact. The best of them was dead. The best of them had died in less time than it takes to draw a breath. To a gun the human boat used on missiles, and the boat had 90 more guns, and the boat had not been touched, and the fleet had sworn, in writing, in the binding glass, not to interfere. The math arrived in 1,100 minds at once, and 1,100 faces showed the same thing, which was the beginning of understanding. There was a young officer in that gallery, whose name the records keep, because she wrote about it afterward, the only Drenask who ever tried to set down honestly what that moment felt like from inside it. Her name was Tessik Vor, and she had been a junior gunnery officer aboard one of the escorts, 22 years old, on her first campaign, and she had laughed at the human girl louder than most, because she was young, and she wanted the older officers to see that she was fierce. She wrote that when the crest of fire opened along that line of fire and Sarn Vikoth was gone, she did not feel fear. Not at first. She felt confusion, a deep wrongness, like watching water run uphill. The thing she had just seen could not happen. Her whole life had been built inside a world where the old law did not lose, and the champion of the 9th Talon could not die in a heartbeat to a missile gun. And now both of those things had happened, in front of her, and the world she lived in simply did not have room for them. She wrote that she sat very still and waited for someone to explain it. For an officer to stand up and say the human ship had cheated, the duel was a trick, everything was fine. No one stood up, and in the silence she understood, for the first time in her life, that there might be things in the universe larger than the old law, and that she had been living inside a small belief and calling it the whole sky. She survived. She was on one of the 1,240 ships the human girl chose to spare. She left the fleet within a year, because she found she could no longer laugh at anyone, and a Drenask officer, who cannot laugh at the weak, is no use to the 9th Talon. She wrote her account so that her people would have at least one record of the truth from inside the silence, and it is read now, quietly, by every young Drenask before their first campaign, as a warning against the thing the girl came to kill. On the dueling deck, High Marshal Veth Caro had not moved. He was staring at the place where his champion had been, and his great bronze-plated body had gone very still, and the silver light of the explosion played across the bony crest of his skull. "That was your champion," Nell said quietly. "By the old law, my 9 worlds are spared, and the Ascendancy withdraws. That's the deal you signed. We can stop here. I'd prefer it if we stopped here." She looked up at him. "Order your fleet to withdraw, Marshal. Honor the record. Go home. For 1 second, you almost believe he will do it. You can see the calculation moving behind his eyes, the 19,000 years of law against the 4,000 ships of his fleet, and the small gray girl who has just killed his best man with a point defense gun. But the Dreniskar were a dueling people, and a dueling people cannot survive losing in front of 1,100 witnesses. To withdraw now was to admit that the old law had been broken by a human child, that the 19,000-year unbeaten record had ended on his watch, in front of his officers, over a frontier of 9 worthless colony worlds. He could not do it. His pride was older than his sense. "The duel is void," Veth Karo said. His voice shook with rage. "You brought a ship of trickery, a ship of 99 guns. This is no champion. This is a war machine, wearing a duel's clothing. The old law does not recognize it. The record is void." "The record isn't void," Nell said. "You read the terms. You signed them. 1 ship against 1 ship, no size named, no guns counted. I beat your champion clean, and your fleet swore not to interfere." Her voice did not rise. "You don't get to break a contract because you lost it, Marshal. That's not how it works for us." "I am the 9th Talon," Veth Karo roared, and the whole gallery roared with him, because they could feel their unbroken history slipping away, and they could not bear it. 4,000 ships answer to me. You are 1 boat and 1 girl, and a clever reading of an old law. Take her. Take the human. We will see how clever her ship is when we strip it apart cell by cell." The honor guard moved toward Nell Okafor. She had been waiting for exactly this. You could see it. She had walked onto their flagship alone and unarmed and signed a contract binding their whole fleet, and she had let them mock her, and she had killed their champion with a single gun, and she had given them 1 clean chance to honor their own law and go home, and she had known, the whole time, that their pride would not let them take it. "Bright Lance," she said, "they've broken the record. The witnesses interfered. You're released from the old law." She did not move as the 7-foot honor guard closed on her. "Show them what the rest of the guns are for." And 4,000 warships of the Dreniskar ascendancy, sworn witnesses all, learned what it meant to laugh at a human girl. The honor guard never reached her. Here is the thing you did not understand until much later, when there was time to study the recordings and trace the cruel perfect shape of what she had done. She had not needed to break the old law. She had made the High Marshal break it for her, and she had made him do it in front of 4,000 sworn witnesses, and that distinction was the whole trap, and it had closed the moment Veth Karo declared the duel void and ordered her seized. Think about the binding glass. Think about what your own law actually said. The fleet had sworn, in the sacred record, not to interfere in the duel. That oath protected the human ship from the fleet for as long as the duel ran by the rules. But it ran both ways, the way all real contracts run both ways, and no Drenask had read it closely enough to see that, because no Drenask had ever needed the protection. The instant the High Marshal voided a duel he had lawfully lost, the instant he ordered his guard to seize a champion who had won clean, he was the one who broke the record. He was the one who turned the fleet from sworn witnesses into interfering parties. And the old law, the same old law that had ended 211 civilizations, was very clear about what happened to a party that broke a sealed duel. The protection of the record was forfeit. The forfeiting party stood outside the law's shelter, exposed, with no claim to mercy or restraint, judged to have abandoned the very code that made them Dreniskar. The girl had not just beaten the champion. She had maneuvered the High Marshal into legally stripping his own fleet of every protection their 19,000-year law could offer, by his own free choice, witnessed and recorded, while she stood quietly on his deck and let him do it. When she spoke the release word to her ship, she was not committing an act of war. She was, by the strictest reading of the Dreniskar's own most sacred law, executing a lawful judgment against an oathbreaker. The Ascendancy's jurists confirmed it afterward, in shame, because they could not honestly deny it. By the old law, the Bright Lance had every right to do what it did next. The old law had killed 211 worlds. The 212th time it was invoked, It killed the people who had written it. The bright lance had been holding lock on 4,000 ships for 9 minutes, and the moment Nell spoke the release word, 90 guns spoke at once. You were in the fleet. You remember where you were. Maybe you were a gunnery officer on one of the heavy line ships, 6 kilometers of armor and pride, 300 crew, a vessel that had stood in the second rank at the taking of 40 worlds. Maybe you thought in the first half second that your ship was safe, because your ship was enormous, and the enemy was one small boat, and the boat could not possibly be aiming at all of you at once. It was aiming at all of you at once. That was the entire point of it. The first volley from the bright lance did not spread out the way fleet fire spreads out, searching for targets. It arrived everywhere in the same instant. 90 bolts of dark blue light that crossed the dueling sphere and the formation beyond it, faster than your ships could turn, and each bolt had been solved to the centimeter by a mind that had been watching you for 9 minutes and knew exactly where your reactors lived. 90 ships died in the first volley. Not damaged, died. The dark bolts went through their hulls the way the first one had gone through the crest of fire, nose to tail, reactor to reactor, and 90 warships of the Ascendancy simply opened along a line and detonated, and the formation that had been laughing 1 minute before was suddenly lit from within by 90 new stars. Then the bright lance cycled its guns and fired again. The second volley took 2.5 seconds to arrive after the first. In those 2.5 seconds, 4,000 Drenesk ships tried to do 4,000 different things, and none of them mattered, because the human ship's mind had already solved for all of them. It had modeled how a panicking fleet scatters. It had been built, specifically, to fight the moment when an enemy stops being a formation and becomes a mob. The second volley found the ships that had begun to turn and punched them through the flank instead of the nose. 90 more stars bloomed in the dark. You have to understand the speed of it to understand the horror of it. The Dreneskar were not slow. Their ships were fast. Their crews were drilled. Their reflexes had been honed by 19,000 years of war. On any other day, against any other enemy, the fleet would have reacted to the first volley before the second arrived, would have raised shields and broken formation, and returned fire and turned the engagement into a real battle. But the bright lance did not give them a real battle. It gave them an execution at the speed of thought. The human mind running the guns updated its 4,000 firing solutions 60 times every second, which meant that in the time it took a Drenask captain to register that the ship beside him had exploded and open his mouth to give an order, the human ship had already chosen, solved, and fired the volley that would kill him too. The fleet was not reacting too slowly. The fleet was reacting at the normal speed of a fast and disciplined navy, and the human ship was simply operating in a faster world, the way an adult moves through a game played by children. The third volley came, and the fourth. The pattern of it was the thing that broke you, more than the deaths. There was a shape to the killing, a logic, and somewhere in the first 30 seconds your mind grasped the shape and wished it had not. The human ship was not firing at the nearest targets, or the largest, or the ones shooting at it. It was firing at the ships whose deaths would most reduce the fleet's ability to ever organize a response, and it was doing this faster than the fleet could reorganize, so that every time a new officer took command of a shattered formation and began to impose order, that officer's ship was the next to die. The bright lance was not just killing ships, it was killing every attempt to stop being killed, the instant the attempt began. You would watch a cruiser captain start to rally the ships around him, start to form a defensive sphere, start to do the thing your training said to do, and then his ship would open along a line of dark fire, and the sphere would dissolve back into a panicking mob, and the human ship would move on to the next officer, who showed the discipline to try. After a while, the officers stopped trying. That was the worst of it. The fleet learned, in under a minute, that leadership was a death sentence, that the moment you stood out as someone giving orders, the human ship marked you and erased you, and so the surviving captains went quiet and small and stopped giving orders at all, and the fleet became a thing with no head, 4,000 ships becoming 3,000 becoming 2, each one alone in the dark, waiting to see whether the dark blue light would choose it next. High Marshal Veth Caro stood on his dueling deck and watched his fleet begin to die, and he gave the order he should have given before he signed anything. "All ships," he screamed into the fleet net. "Open fire. Destroy that vessel. Concentrate everything. Everything now." It was the right order. It came far too late, and it would not have mattered if it had come on time. 4,000 ships had laughed at one ship, and now 4,000 ships tried to kill it, and you remember how that went, because you were there and you fired, and you watched your fire fail. The bright lance had armor the Ascendancy could not break. You saw it survive the lance of a 41-time champion without a scratch. Now it survived the combined fire of a fleet. The dark glowing hull drank plasma and railshot and missile alike, smearing it across that strange blue surface and bleeding it away into nothing, and the human ship did not break, and it did not rock, and it did not so much as drift off its mark. It hung in the center of the dueling sphere, calm as a held breath, and it killed you 90 ships at a time. There was a moment, perhaps a minute into it, when the whole fleet fired at once, on the High Marshal's order, every gun the Ninth Talon possessed converging on one point. For an instant the bright lance disappeared inside a sphere of fire, so bright the flagship's windows polarized to black to save the eyes of the watchers. The Ascendancy held its breath. Surely no ship, no matter how strong, could survive that. Surely this was the moment the comedy turned back the right way, and the human boat ceased to exist. The fire faded. The bright lance was still there. The hull glowed a little hotter, the dark blue shading toward a deep furnace red along its leading edges, and that was all. It had not moved. It had not been hurt. And in the silence after that great combined volley, while the Ascendancy stared at the impossible undamaged thing in the center of their fire, the bright lance fired again, and 90 more ships died, and the watchers understood that they had just spent the single greatest concentration of firepower the Ninth Talon could produce, and it had done nothing, and they had nothing larger left to try. This is the part the survivors could never explain to the homeworld. Not the deaths. The deaths were simple. What they could not explain was the patience. The bright lance was never in a hurry. It did not fire wildly. It did not waste a single bolt. It chose, each cycle, the 90 ships whose deaths would most break the fleet's ability to fight back, and it killed exactly those 90, and then it chose again. It killed the command ships first, the ones with the flag officers and the fleet coordinators, so that the Ascendancy could not organize a defense. Then it killed the carriers, before they could launch. Then it killed the ships that had begun, sensibly, to run. It killed the runners with particular care. It did not want any ship to reach the jump line and escape with a confused, fearful, exaggerated story. It wanted the survivors it left to be survivors it chose. Think about what that means. The human ship was not just winning the battle, it was editing it. It was deciding, in real time, which ships would live to tell the tale, and it was killing every ship that might tell it wrong. The ones that ran in panic, that would have arrived home raving about an unstoppable demon, those it killed. The ones that held their formation, that kept their discipline, that could be trusted to report what they had actually seen, those it spared, for now. The fleet was being curated. You were either evidence or you were nothing, and the human girl's machine was choosing which. The aces of the Ninth Talon tried. You should know that, in fairness to your own people. 3 squadrons of the fleet's finest pilots, veterans of 40 conquests, formed up and made a coordinated run on the bright lance, weaving the attack pattern that had broken defending fleets at a dozen worlds, splitting their fire to overload its tracking. It was a good plan. Against any other enemy it would have been a brilliant plan. The bright lance solved it in the time it took the squadrons to commit, and killed the lead elements of all 3 at once, so that the survivors flew through the wreckage of their own wingmen, and then it killed those survivors too, methodically, in the order that did the most damage to morale across the rest of the fleet. The recordings of the fleet net from that minute are not played in the war colleges. They are considered too distressing. The pilots could be heard realizing, one after another, that nothing they had ever learned applied. Inside the bright lance, it did not sound like a battle. That is the part the Ascendancy could never have known and would not have believed. There was no roar of guns, Because the guns did not roar inside the hull, they only hummed as the reactor fed them. A deep, even hum that never changed pitch, no matter how many ships died outside. There were 11 people in their couches, and the loudest sound was the ship's mind calling targets in its calm, flat voice, and the 11 quiet voices answering. The weapons chief, a steady older man named Asa Mbeki, confirmed each firing solution the way another man might confirm items on a shopping list, without heat, without hurry, because Nell had drilled them for 2 years on exactly one thing, which was to stay boring while the universe ended outside the hull. They were boring. They were magnificently, professionally boring. The recordings of the Bright Lance's own bridge, which humanity released years later, are studied now too, alongside the recordings of the dying fleet, and the contrast is the whole lesson. One side was screaming. The other side was reading numbers off a screen. It is worth dwelling on that, because the ascendancy assumed, for a long time, that they had been beaten by some terrible human ferocity, some berserk fury that matched their own warrior fire and exceeded it. It was the opposite. They had been beaten by calm. They had been beaten by 11 people who were so unafraid, so completely certain of their ship and their commander and their plan, that they could sit through the destruction of the greatest fleet in the galaxy and never once raise their voices. The Dreniskar had built their whole civilization on fury and pride and the glory of the single great warrior, and they had been undone by a small gray girl and 10 people who treated the end of an empire like a routine maintenance task. There is no warrior song for that. The Ninth Talon has tried to write one. It cannot be done. Commander, the ship said, in that same calm voice, while around it the greatest fleet in the galaxy came apart. The flagship is firing on me directly. 9-kilometer hull, primary spinal weapon charging. It is the strongest gun in the fleet. Recommendation. You're standing on it, Nell said. She was still on the dueling deck. The honor guard had stopped trying to reach her. They were on their knees, most of them, watching the gallery windows fill with the light of their dying fleet, and the High Marshal stood among them, frozen, a warlord who had just understood that he had personally signed away the lives of everyone he commanded. Don't fire on the flagship yet. I'm still aboard, and I want the Marshal to watch the whole thing. Understood, allowing the flagship's shot. Bracing, the 9-kilometer flagship of the Ninth Talon fired its primary weapon at the Bright Lance from point-blank range. It was the single most powerful shot any Drenask vessel could produce, a spinal lance designed to gut a fortress moon, and it struck the human warship square on the bow. The Bright Lance absorbed it. The hull glowed brighter for a moment, the dark blue flaring almost white along the strike line, and then it faded, and the ship was unharmed, and on the dueling deck, Veth Caro made a sound that was not a word. You felt that shot through the deck plates of every ship in the fleet. You knew what it was. There was not a Drenisk alive who had not been taught, as a child, that the flagship's spinal lance was the final word, the thing that ended arguments, the gun that no wall in the galaxy had ever stood against. And you watched it strike the human boat and fail, and the last floor fell out from under the comfort you had stood on all your life. There was nothing bigger. There was nothing left to hope for. The strongest thing your people had ever built had just been used, at point-blank range, against a ship that did not even bother to dodge, and it had changed the color of the hull for half a second and nothing else. His main gun is spent and will not recharge for 90 seconds, the Bright Lance said. He has nothing left that can hurt me. The fleet is at 31% and falling. Orders, Commander. Nell Okafor turned to look at the High Marshal of the Ninth Talon. He was 7 feet tall and plated in bronze, and he had taken the surrenders of 211 worlds, and he was staring at her now, the way the conquered had stared at him, and she let him look at her for a long moment before she spoke. You had a chance to honor your own law, she said. I gave it to you. I killed your champion clean, by your rules, in front of your own witnesses. And I asked you to go home, and you chose this instead. Everything that's happening to your people right now, you chose it. I want you to be very clear about that. This is not me breaking your law. This is your law, finally, falling on someone who deserves it. Mercy, Veth Caro whispered. The word seemed to hurt him coming out. He had never said it. No one had ever said it to him, because no one had ever beaten him. Mercy. We will withdraw. We will honor the record. The 9 worlds are yours. I beg you, mercy. Now you want the record, Nell said, now that you're losing. She let the silence stretch. Around the flagship, the fleet kept dying, 90 ships at a time, in clean, patient cycles, and the light of it filled the dueling deck. And then she did something the Ascendancy would argue about for 1,000 years. Bright lance, she said, cease fire. The guns stopped. You did not believe it, at first. None of you did. You were in one of the surviving ships, and you had spent 4 minutes watching the dark blue light pick your fleet apart, 90 at a time, and you had stopped giving orders because giving orders got you killed, and you had reached the place past fear where you were simply waiting for your turn, counting the seconds until the light chose your hull. And then the light stopped coming, and you did not feel relief because you did not trust it. You waited for it to start again. You watched the human ship hang there in the center of the wreckage, undamaged, unhurried, 90 guns still glowing, and you understood that it had not stopped because it had to. It had not run out of targets or ammunition or power. It had simply decided to stop. In the middle of an execution, it could have finished in another minute, and that decision was more frightening than the killing had been, because it meant the thing in the center of your fleet was not a weapon at all. A weapon does not choose. A weapon fires until it is empty or destroyed. This had chosen, in cold blood, to leave you alive, and a thing that chooses is a thing with a purpose, and you did not yet know what its purpose was, and not knowing was the worst feeling you had ever had. The recordings show the survivors in that moment, and what they show is 1,240 ships holding perfectly still, every captain afraid that any movement, any signal, any flicker of engine light, might be read by the human ship as a reason to resume. Nobody fled, nobody fired, nobody even turned. The mightiest fleet the Drenaskar had ever floated, or what was left of it, sat frozen in the dark like prey that has gone still in the hope that the predator will lose interest, and the human girl let them sit there and feel it, and understand exactly how completely their survival had stopped being something they controlled. The sudden silence was almost worse than the killing. 4,000 ships had become, in just under 4 minutes, a little over 1,200, and the survivors hung scattered and broken across the dark, their formations shattered, their command ships gone, their carriers gone, their best champion gone, and now the human ship simply stopped and floated, calm and undamaged and unhurried, and waited. You don't get mercy because you asked for it, Nell said to the High Marshal. You get it because I decide who lives, and I've decided, and you're going to do exactly what I say, and every ship you have left is going to do it too. Do you understand me, Marshal? Veth Caro, on his knees on his own dueling deck, said the second most important thing he would ever say. I understand, he said. Good, said Nell Okafor. Then let me explain what humanity actually came here to do, because it was never about 9 colony worlds. You walked into something much older than your law, and you're going to carry the message home yourself. Nell Okafor sat down. She did it on purpose, in front of the kneeling High Marshal, on the edge of the raised dueling platform, the way a person sits when the dangerous part of a conversation is over. It was the most frightening thing she had done yet, because only someone who was completely safe would do it. She let her legs hang over the edge of the platform, and she looked at Veth Caro, and she told him the truth. Your people have a record, she said. 19,000 years undefeated, 211 worlds. You're very proud of it. I read about it for 4 years before I came here. She tilted her head. Do you know what we noticed? The thing your historians never wrote down. The High Marshal did not answer. He was watching the wrist device on her arm the way a man watches a snake. Every world you took the same way, Nell said. The challenge. 1 ship against 1 ship. The old law. It's not a tactic, Marshal. It's a religion. You can't conquer any other way. You don't know how. In 19,000 years, no one ever built a ship that could beat your champion in a fair duel, so you never had to learn what to do when someone did. Your whole empire stands on the belief that the old law cannot lose. She gestured at the broken fleet outside the windows. We came here to end that belief. The 9 colony worlds were just where you happened to be standing when we did it. You, in the surviving ships, were listening. The bright lance was broadcasting all of it on every ascendancy channel, deliberately, so that every officer in the remaining 1,200 ships could hear what their High Marshal was being told. That was part of the weapon too. The girl was not just beating the 9th Talon, she was unwriting the thing that made the 9th Talon possible. Here's what we figured out, Nell went on. A people who never lose, never learn to survive losing. That's the weakness. It was always the weakness. You built 19,000 years on top of a thing that had never been tested, and you never once asked what would happen to you if it failed, because it had never failed, so the question seemed insane. We asked it for you. We've been asking it for 11 years, ever since the first time we watched you take a world. We knew that the day someone finally beat the old law, your whole civilization would have no idea what to do, because nothing in your history would tell you. And here we are. Look at your officers, Marshal. Look at the recordings later. None of them know what to do. They've never been taught. There's nothing to teach. She was right. And you knew she was right, because you were one of those officers and you did not know what to do. There was no doctrine for this. There was no drill. The 9th Talon trained for everything, for ambush and siege and boarding and the long pursuit, but it had never once trained for the simple fact of losing, because losing was not a thing that happened to the Drenaskar. You sat at your station in a surviving ship and you waited for an order, any order, and the order did not come, because the people who gave orders were dead or kneeling, and the part of you that had always known what to do had gone quiet and would never be quite as loud again. So you beat us, Veth Caro said. His voice was hollow. You have made your point. Why have you not finished it? Why does your ship not fire? You have 1,200 targets and a hull we cannot scratch. Finish it, human. Take your revenge and be done. Because revenge is small, Nell said. And we didn't come all this way to do something small. She walked to the great window of the dueling deck, where the broken fleet hung in the dark, and she looked out at it for a moment, and then she said something the Ascendancy did not expect, because it was not about them at all. You called my 9 worlds worthless, she said. Colony worlds, farms and mines and frontier towns. You said it twice, like it was funny, that we'd send a champion to die over 9 worthless worlds. She did not turn around. There are 11 million people on those 9 worlds, Marshal. Farmers and children and people who came out to the edge of nothing to build something, because that is what my species does. We go to the edge and we build. They didn't ask for a war. They didn't even know your fleet was coming until 3 weeks ago. They're sitting in their houses right now, on 9 worlds, waiting to find out if a girl they've never met managed to keep them alive. Now she turned. They are not worthless. They are the whole reason I'm here. You measure worth in conquests and champions and 19,000 years of pride. We measure it in 11 million people who get to wake up tomorrow because one ship was enough. That difference, Marshal, is the entire war between your people and mine, and you lost it the moment you decided which of us was small. The High Marshal had no answer for that. There was no answer in the old law for a people who would build a ship that could end an empire and aim it, not at glory, not at conquest, not even at revenge, but simply at keeping 11 million ordinary strangers safe in their beds. The Drenaskar had 1,000 words for honor and not one for that. It was, perhaps, the thing they understood least about humanity, and the thing that frightened them most when they finally understood it, because a people who will spend that much power on the ordinary and the safe is a people whose power has no ceiling you can ever reach by threatening anything they love. You cannot bargain with such a people. You can only stay off their frontier and hope they never read your law. She stood up. Here's what's going to happen, she said. You're going to take your surviving ships home, all 1,240 of them. I counted. I want all 1,240 to make it back, because I need witnesses, and dead men make poor witnesses. She leaned forward. And when you get home, you're going to stand in front of your ascendancy, and you're going to tell them, in your own voice, exactly what happened here. You're going to tell them the old law lost. You're going to tell them a human girl in a 200-meter boat beat your 41-time champion with a point defense gun and then took apart your fleet without taking a scratch, and that she let you live on purpose, and that she could have killed every one of you and chose not to. They will not believe me, Veth Caro said. They will name me a coward and a liar. To return from a lost duel is to return in disgrace. Better you kill me here. No, Nell said. That's the whole point. You're going to live in the disgrace. You're going to carry the broken record on your back for the rest of your life, and so is every officer in those 1,200 ships, and that's the message. Not that humans can kill you. Anyone can kill you. The message is that humans can beat you at the one thing you built your entire civilization to be unbeatable at, and then choose to let you live, and there is nothing in your 19,000 years that has ever felt as much like losing as that will. She let the words settle over the kneeling marshal and the listening fleet. You want me to kill you because killing you would let you off, she said. A clean death in a lost duel. Your people have a place for that. They have songs for that. The warrior who fell against impossible odds, honored forever. I'm not going to give you a song, Marshal. I'm going to give you a long life and the truth, and I'm going to make you carry it home and say it out loud in your own hall. And your people are going to have to find a place for that, and they don't have one, and building one is going to cost them more than any war I could fight. The High Marshal of the Ninth Talon bowed his head. Now, the Ascendancy historians who studied this day later always stopped here, and they always asked the same question, and you have probably asked it too. Why did she let them go? 1,240 warships. Even broken, even leaderless, that is a force that could be rebuilt, recrewed, sent back. A wiser conqueror would have finished them. Veth Caro himself, in her place, would have finished them. So why did the human girl, who clearly understood war better than anyone the Ascendancy had ever faced, choose to leave the enemy alive? The answer is the part that should frighten you most, and it is the part the homeworld understood far too late. She let them go because the Bright Lance was not the only ship. Marshal, Nell said, almost gently, as she walked back toward the docking arm and her waiting vessel. One more thing, before you go home and tell your story. You've been calling my ship a fleet, as a kind of joke, because it has 90 guns and it fights like a fleet. I want to clear that up before you leave. The Bright Lance is not a fleet. She stopped at the airlock and looked back. The Bright Lance is a frigate, she said. It's the smallest warship class we build. A frigate. We have 900 of them, and we have things much larger than frigates that we did not send, because 900 frigates was already more than this needed. She let that land. You met one frigate today, Marshal. One. And it cost you 2,700 ships and your 19,000 years of pride. I want you to do that arithmetic on the way home. I want every officer in your surviving ships to do it too. One frigate, 900 frigates, and the real fleet behind them that we keep for emergencies. The silence on the dueling deck was the silence of 1,200 ships listening, and 1,200 ships doing the arithmetic, and 1,200 ships understanding, all at once, that they had not been attacked by humanity's strength. They had been corrected by its smallest finger. You did the arithmetic. You could not help it. One frigate had killed 2,700 ships and walked away untouched. 900 of them was a number your mind refused, at first, to hold, because 900 frigates was enough to take apart every fleet the Ascendancy had ever floated, all of them at once, in an afternoon, and still have most of the frigates left over. And that was before the larger things. That was before the real fleet. The girl had not bluffed and she had not boasted. She had simply told you the size of the thing standing behind her, and the size of the thing standing behind her was the end of any thought you had ever had of fighting it. She paused in the airlock, and added one more thing, and it was the thing the High Marshal would carry longest of all. You spent 19,000 years teaching the galaxy to be afraid of you, she said. 211 worlds knelt because they believed the old law could not lose. That fear was your real weapon. It was worth more than your fleet. A world that believes it cannot win does not even try, and so you took most of them without firing a shot. just by being the thing that always wins. She looked back at him. I didn't come here to kill your fleet, Marshal. Your fleet was just in the way. I came here to kill the fear. Every world you ever frightened is going to hear that a human girl in a frigate beat the old law clean and walked away. Every world you might have frightened in the next 1,000 years is going to grow up knowing you can lose. That's what I took from you today. Not 2,700 ships. The thing the ships were for. You are not the people who always win anymore, and you are never going to be again, and there is nothing in your 19,000 years that prepared you for being ordinary. It landed harder than any of the rest of it. The fleet, the champion, the pride, those were terrible losses, but they were losses a warrior people could understand and grieve. This was something else. She had not just defeated the Drenaskar. She had made them small, made them one power among many, made them a people who could be beaten, and therefore a people who would be tested, again and again, by every world that had ever knelt to them in fear. The unbeaten were safe, in a way that no one else in the galaxy was safe. She had ended that safety with a sentence, in an airlock, on her way out the door. "Why are you telling me this?" Veth Caro asked. His voice was hollow. "Why give us the number? You could leave us afraid of one ship. Why tell us there are 900? "Because I don't want a war," Nell said. "A war means I'd have to send the rest, and the rest don't leave survivors. I want you afraid of the right thing. I want you to go home, and I want every duelist culture in this arm of the galaxy to hear, from a Drenask High Marshal's own mouth, that the humans came with a frigate, and won, and went home. I want the old law to die in your own throats, not on ours. That's cheaper for everyone, mostly for you." She stepped into the airlock. "Take your 1,200 ships and go," she said. "The 9 worlds are spared, by your law and mine. Don't come back to this frontier. And Marshal," she paused, "tell them I said the humans were polite about it, because today I really was." The airlock closed. You watched the bright lance detach from the flagship's hull. You watched 238 meters of dark, undamaged metal drift clear of the 9-kilometer wreck-strewn hulk that had been the proudest flagship in the Ascendancy, and you watched it turn, unhurried, toward open space. You had fired everything you had at that ship. So had 2,700 ships that were no longer there to fire anything, and it floated away from you without a scratch, the way a man walks away from an argument he was never in danger of losing. And then, because the human girl had one more thing she wanted the Ascendancy to remember forever, the bright lance did the last thing none of you would ever be able to explain. It did not jump away. It turned, slowly, and presented its broadside to the surviving fleet, all 90 guns, and it held there, lit and ready, for 10 full seconds. 10 seconds in which it could have killed you all. 10 seconds in which it chose, again, in front of you, not to. And then it powered down its guns, one by one, 90 lights going dark in a slow, deliberate line, until the ship was once more just a dark sliver of metal against the stars, harmless-looking, small, the kind of thing an honor guard might step on. Then it jumped and was gone, and left 1,240 ships of the Drenaskar Ascendancy floating in the wreckage of their certainty, alive on purpose, with a long journey home and a story none of them wanted to tell. The journey home took the 9th Talon 19 days. For 19 days, 1,240 broken warships limped along the jump lanes toward the Ascendancy homeworld, and for 19 days, High Marshal Veth Caro sat in the wreck of his flagship and tried to write the words he would have to say. He could not make them sound like anything but defeat. He tried 100 openings. We met a worthy foe. We were deceived by a trick of law. We fought with honor against overwhelming force. None of it was true, and he knew it was not true, and he knew that everyone in his surviving fleet had heard the human girl explain, in her calm, flat voice, exactly how small a thing had beaten them. 1 frigate, 900 frigates, and the real fleet behind them. He did the arithmetic again, the way she had told him to, and it broke him a little more each time. You did the arithmetic too. Everyone did. By the 5th day, the surviving fleet was no longer a fleet. It was 1,240 ships full of officers, who had each, privately, in the dark, worked out the same number. If one frigate could do this, then 900 frigates could erase the ascendancy from the galaxy in an afternoon, and the humans had not even bothered to send them, because 900 frigates was already, in the girl's own words, more than this needed. That was the wound that did not close, not that humanity was stronger, that humanity had been bored. There was a moment on the third day of the voyage home that the survivors still speak of in low voices. The fleet had limped to the edge of the human frontier, to the jump line that marked the boundary of the 9 colony worlds, and as they crossed it, they passed close to the wreckage of the 2700. The humans had not cleared it. They had left it exactly where it fell, 2,700 broken hulls drifting in a vast slow cloud across the dark, lit by the 9 colony suns. The 9th Talon had to fly through it to go home. There was no other lane. It took 11 hours to thread the surviving fleet through the graveyard of itself. 11 hours of passing your own dead, of recognizing ships you had served on, escorts you had trained beside, line ships whose captains you had eaten with the night before the battle. All of them opened along that single clean line of dark fire, all of them silent and cold, and turning slowly in the light of the worlds they had come to take. The fleet flew through it without a word. There was nothing to say, and every officer in those 1,200 ships understood, in the 11 silent hours, that the humans had left the wreckage uncleared on purpose, the way you leave a thing where it fell, so the ones who come after will have to look at it, and that the next time any Drenask thought about the human frontier, this was the image their mind would offer them. Not glory, not a worthy hunt, a cloud of their own dead, lit by the suns of 9 worlds they had called worthless, drifting forever as a thing you had to fly through to get home. There were arguments on those ships during the long voyage home. You may have been in one of them. There were officers who said the girl had lied about the 900, that no species could build and crew that many ships of that power, that the number was a bluff designed to keep the ascendancy from rebuilding. And there were officers who had stood on the dueling deck recordings and watched a point defense gun gut the crest of fire, and who said, quietly, that a people who could build one such ship could build 900, and that the girl had not bluffed about anything else all day, and there was no reason to think she had started at the end. The second group always won the argument, in the end, because the first group could never explain away the wreckage. 2,700 hulls. You flew home through some of it. It is hard to call a thing a bluff when you are threading your ship between the corpses of your fleet. When the 9th Talon reached the homeworld, the ascendancy was waiting, because broken jump signatures travel ahead of broken fleets, and word had run before them that something had gone wrong on the human frontier. The whole High Council of the dueling people assembled in the Hall of Talons, beneath the 19,000 banners of 19,000 years of unbroken victory, and they summoned Veth Caro to give his account. He gave it. He did not soften it. By the time he stood in the hall, he had understood that softening it was exactly what the human girl had wanted him to be tempted to do, and that her real victory depended on him telling it straight. So he told it straight. He told the council about the small gray girl who walked alone onto his dueling deck and let them laugh at her. He told them how she had made his own fleet sign the old law as witnesses, binding them not to interfere, before she ever revealed her ship's true nature. He told them how she had killed Sarn Vekath, the finest duelist of the age, with a single-point defense gun, by the rules, cleanly, and then offered to go home. He told them how he had refused, how his pride had refused, how he had broken the record himself, declared the duel void because he could not bear to have lost it, and ordered her seized, and how, because he had broken the old law in front of 4,000 sworn witnesses, the human ship had been released from it, and had then destroyed 2,700 warships in under 4 minutes without taking a single hit. The Hall of Talons was silent in a way it had never been silent. And then Veth Caro told them the last part, the part the human girl had built the whole day around, and he made himself say every word of it. She let us live, he said. She had us beaten. She had killed 3 of every 4 ships I commanded, and she stood unharmed in the middle of it, and she stopped, and she let the rest of us go. 1,240 ships. She counted us. She wanted exactly that many to come home, so that you would hear this from our own mouths and not from a rumor. He looked up at the assembled council, at the 19,000 banners. She told me her ship was a frigate, their smallest class. She told me they have 900 of them, and larger things behind, and that she had not sent the larger things because one frigate was already too much for what we were. She gave me the number on purpose. She wanted us afraid of the right thing. A counselor rose, an old warlord, his crest gone gray with age, and his voice shook. "Then we must answer this," he said. "We cannot let it stand. 19,000 years of victory cannot end on the word of one human child. We will gather the full ascendancy, every talon, every fleet. We will return to the human frontier with such a force that no number of their ships can." "No," said Vethcaro. It was the third most important thing he ever said, and it ended an age. "You did not hear her," he said, slowly. "I heard her. I sat on my own dueling deck and I heard her, and I have heard nothing else for 19 days. She does not want a war. She told me so. She said a war means she would have to send the rest, and the rest leave no survivors. She let 1,240 of us live for one reason only, so that we would come here and stop you from doing exactly what you are proposing right now." He stepped forward, into the center of the hall, beneath the banners. "If we gather the ascendancy and return, we will not be fighting one frigate. We will be the emergency she keeps the real fleet for, and there will be no messengers sent home from that. There will be no survivors counted. There will be no story told in this hall, because there will be no one left to tell it, and no hall left to tell it in." He turned and looked at the 19,000 banners of the unbeaten dueling people. "The old law is dead," he said. "It died on my deck, by my own hand, the moment I broke it because I could not stand to lose. The humans did not kill it. I did. They only made sure I survived to tell you so. Take the banners down. 19,000 years are over. Our certainty is the only thing they came to take, and they took it, and they were polite about it, and they went home. It did not happen all at once. There were factions that fought it. There were younger warlords who had not been at the frontier, who had not watched the recordings, who still carried the old certainty in their blood, and could not believe it was gone. For a time it looked as though the ascendancy might tear itself apart over the question, the ones who wanted to gather and march against the humans, and the ones who had seen the wreckage and would not. But the recordings settled it. Vethcaro made every Drenask of Fighting Age watch the full record of the frontier, all of it, the laughter and the champion's death, and the 4 minutes of patient killing, and the 10 seconds at the end when 90 guns held their fire and chose not to. You cannot watch that and keep the old certainty. The certainty was the casualty. The girl had aimed at it from the first step she took onto the deck, and she had not missed. That is the part the rest of the galaxy still does not quite believe. Not the battle. The galaxy believes the battle. Wreckage drifts on the human frontier to this day, 2,700 hulls of it, and salvagers go and look and come back quiet. What the galaxy cannot believe is that the dueling people, who had never lost in 19,000 years, simply stopped. No counterattack, no second fleet, no revenge. They took down their banners, and they withdrew from 4 contested frontiers, and they sent envoys to the humans asking, carefully, what the terms of peace might be. The terms were simple. There was only one. Tell the story honestly, to everyone who asks, forever. Do not let it become a legend in which the ascendancy fought bravely against a vast human armada. Tell it the way it happened. 1 girl, 1 frigate, 238 meters, a point defense gun, and the choice, made twice, in front of witnesses, to let the losers live. The humans, it turned out, did not want to be feared as a great and terrible armada. They had decided that the most useful thing in the galaxy was to be the species that beat your best with its smallest and then went home. An armada invites a coalition. A frigate that is bored invites nothing but silence and very careful manners. There is a thing that is known now, in the quiet councils of a dozen species, that was not known before that day. It is known that the humans watch. It is known that they read your laws before they meet you. the way they read the old law for 11 years before they ever sailed to the frontier, and that they look for the place where your certainty lives, the thing you have never had to defend because it has never been tested, and that if you give them a reason, they will come and test it with the smallest tool that will do the job, and they will be polite, and they will leave witnesses, and your certainty will not survive the visit. Every duelist culture in the arm of the galaxy heard the Ascendancy's story from the Ascendancy's own envoys, exactly as the girl intended, and every one of them quietly retired the part of their doctrine that assumed they could not lose. Consider the Hethrim, who were not a dueling people, but a counting people, who had conquered along a different arm of the galaxy for 8,000 years on the principle that no defender could match their numbers. They had laughed at the Ascendancy when the news first reached them, the way the strong always laugh at the fallen strong, and they had said, among themselves, that the Dreniskar were fools to be beaten by one ship, that the Hethrim would simply have overwhelmed the human boat with sheer mass and never given it the chance to be clever. And then, very quietly, a Hethrim staff officer pointed out that the human girl had killed 2,700 ships with one frigate precisely because they came at her in mass, and that the Bright Lance had been built, specifically designed from the first rivet, to fight a crowd. The laughing stopped in the Hethrim councils too. They reviewed their own certainty, the unbeaten faith in their numbers, and they found it was exactly the kind of untested floor that the humans liked to walk in and remove, and they withdrew 2 campaigns that year and told no one why. Consider the Vorsk Imperium, who ruled by the long patience, who had never lost because they simply waited longer than any enemy could survive, besieging worlds for centuries until the defenders starved or surrendered. They heard the story, and they were comforted, at first, because patience cannot be beaten by a single quick ship. And then someone reminded them that the human girl had been patient too, that she had read the old law 400 times, that she had waited 4 years to build her ship, and 2 years to drill her crew, and 9 full minutes holding lock on a fleet before she fired a shot, and that if there was one thing the humans had proven that day, it was that they could outwait anyone when they chose to. The Vorsk stopped feeling comforted. Patience was their certainty, and now they knew the humans owned a deeper patience than theirs, and a patient people is the most frightening thing a patient people can imagine. One by one, up and down the arm of the galaxy, the conquering powers heard the Ascendancy's honest account, and one by one, they did the same private arithmetic, and one by one, they found the place in their own certainty where a small, polite human ship might someday come to dock. None of them had been attacked. None of them had lost a single ship. The girl had defeated all of them with one battle they were not even present for, because the thing she had really destroyed at the frontier was not a fleet. It was the idea, anywhere in the galaxy, that any power was safe in the part of itself it had never thought to defend. You met Commander Nell Okafor once, on a dueling deck, when you were certain she was about to die, and you laughed at her with 1,100 others. You have not laughed since. None of you have. The Ninth Talon does not laugh anymore, as a people. It is not a rule. It is just that the sound of it now reminds every Drenask of the moment they made the loudest mistake in their history, laughing at a small gray girl in a plain flight suit who had already, calmly, decided exactly how much of their fleet she was going to leave alive. She spared your 9 worlds, which were her own. She spared your 1,200 ships, which were not. She killed your certainty and let you keep your lives, and she made you carry the difference home and lay it out in your own hall, under your own banners, and that, in the end, was the duel. The Bright Lance is back on the human frontier now, dark and small and harmless-looking, one frigate among 900, with the real fleet kept somewhere behind them for emergencies that the Dreniskar Ascendancy has resolved, with great and lasting care, never again to be. Nell Okafor still commands it. She is older now, a little, and she has never given an interview, and the only words anyone outside her own people has ever recorded from her are the ones she said on the dueling deck, which is, perhaps, the way she wants it. A commander who needs to explain herself has already lost something. She did not lose anything that day. She has never lost anything. That is the whole point of her. There is a story, and it may be true, that the Drenaskar Ascendancy now sends a small escort to the edge of the human frontier once a year, on the anniversary of the battle, and that the escort carries no weapons and broadcasts no challenge, and that it simply waits at the boundary for a day and then goes home. The humans have never explained what it is for. The Drenaskar will not say, but the officers who have flown those missions describe the same thing each time. They sit at the edge of human space, in the dark, near the drifting wreckage of the 2700, and somewhere in that day a small dark frigate always comes. It does not approach. It does not signal. It simply appears at the far edge of sensor range, 238 meters of quiet metal, and it holds there, watching, for as long as the Drenask escort stays, and when the escort turns for home, the frigate is already gone, and no one ever sees it leave. The Drenask who fly that mission say it is the most frightening duty in the fleet, and the most necessary. They go to remember. They go so that the young officers, who were not born when the old law fell, can sit in the dark beside the wreckage of their grandfather's certainty, and feel, in their own bones, the thing that cannot be taught from a recording. They go so that no Drenask will ever again look at a small human ship and laugh. And every year the frigate comes to meet them, and watches, and lets them go home, the way it watched and let them go home the first time, and the message is always the same, delivered in silence across the dark. I see you, I remember, I am still here. Be polite. There was a question a young Drenask asked Veth Caro once, near the end of the old marshal's long life, after he had spent his final decades as the living memory of the worst day in his people's history. The young one asked him whether he hated her, the human girl, after everything she had taken from him. Veth Caro thought about it for a long time, and then he said no. He said you cannot hate the surgeon who saves your life by removing the thing that was killing you, even when the removal is the most painful thing you have ever felt. The old law was killing us, he said. It had been killing us for 19,000 years, making us proud and careless and certain, sending our children off to conquest with the comfortable lie that we could not be beaten. She cut it out of us. It cost us a fleet and our pride, and the whole shape of who we thought we were. But we are still here, and we are no longer the kind of people who laugh at the small and the weak. And that, the old marshal said, is more than 19,000 years of victory ever made of us. The girl beat us, and then she let us become something better than the thing she beat. I do not hate her. I think, if I am honest, that I am grateful, and that being grateful is the last and heaviest thing she took. If you ever see a 200-meter human boat drift up to your formation and ask, politely, for permission to dock, the 9th Talon has only one instruction left in its tactical doctrine, written in the hand of Veth Caro himself, the first and last line of a new and very short law. Let them in, be polite, and whatever they ask of you, do not, under any circumstances, laugh.